The story of a shipwrecked sailor written by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Gabriel Garcia Marquez, born on 6 March 1927, was a Colombian novelist, short story writer, screenwriter, and journalist. He is affectionately known as Gabo throughout Latin America. Marquez started as a journalist and wrote many acclaimed non-fiction works and short stories, but is best known for his novels such as 100 Years of Solitude, published in 1967, Chronicle of a Death Foretold, published in 1981, and Love in the Time of Cholera, published in 1985. However, Marquez's first major work is the story of a shipwrecked sailor, which he wrote as a newspaper series in 1955. His works have achieved significant critical acclaim and widespread commercial success, most notably for popularizing a literary style known as magic realism, which uses magical elements and events in otherwise ordinary and realistic situations. He passed away on 17th April 2014. The story of a shipwrecked sailor tells the saga of Luis Alejandro Velasco, a 20-year-old sailor who was washed overboard during a storm in the middle of the Caribbean Sea on February 28, 1955. Clinging to a life raft without food and water, he survived 10 days on the open sea. What happened to Velasco and his shipmates? Read the following extract from the novella and find out what really happened to them. My first impression was that I was utterly alone in the middle of the ocean. The ship plunged into an abyss and disappeared. I had no idea what was happening. I took hold of one of the bobbing crates and stupidly began to contemplate the sea. It was a perfectly clear day, except for the choppy waves produced by the wind and the cargo scattered across the surface. There was no evidence of a shipwreck. Soon I began to hear shouts nearby. Through the sharp whistling of the wind, I recognized the voice of Julio Amador Carabello, the tall, well-built officer who was yelling at someone. "Fatso, hold there!" It was as if in that instant I had awakened from a moment's deep sleep. It dawned on me that I wasn't alone in the sea. There, only a few meters away, my mates were shouting to one another and trying to stay afloat. Quickly, I began to think. I couldn't swim in just any direction. I knew we were about 50 miles from Cartagena, but I was not yet frightened. For a moment, I thought I could hold on to the crate indefinitely until help arrived. It was reassuring to know that all around me, other sailors were in the same predicament. That was when I saw the raft. There were two life rafts about 7 meters apart. They appeared unexpectedly on the crest of a wave near where my mates were calling out. It seemed odd that none of them could reach the life rafts. In an instant, one of the rafts disappeared from view. I couldn't decide. I found myself swimming towards the one I could see, which was moving farther away from me. I swam for about 3 minutes. I lost sight of the raft momentarily, but I was careful not to lose my bearings. Suddenly, a rough wave pushed the rafts alongside me. It was huge, white, and empty. I struggled to grab the rigging and jump aboard. I made it on the third try. Once on the raft, panting, whipped by the wind, immobilized and freezing, I found it hard to sit up. Then I saw 3 of my mates near the raft trying to reach it. I recognized them immediately. Castillo had a firm grip around Carabello's neck. Carabello, who had been on watch when the accident occurred, was wearing his life jacket. He yelled, "Hold on tight, Castillo!" They floated amid the scattered cargo, about 10 meters away. On the other side was Luis Rengifo, trying to stay above water. With his headphones aloft, In his right hand, he had stripped off his shirt so that he could swim better, but he had lost his life jacket. Even if I hadn't seen him, I would have recognized his cry, "Fatso, paddle over here!" I quickly grabbed the oars and tried to get closer to the men. Carabello, with Castillo clinging to his neck, neared the raft. Much farther away, looking small and desolate, was the fourth of my mates, Ramon Herrera, who was waving at me while he held on to a crate. If I had had to decide, I wouldn't have known which of my mates to go after first. But when I saw Herrera, the happy young man from Arjona, who had been with me only a few moments before, I began to paddle furiously. But the life raft was almost 2 meters long. It was very heavy in that lurching sea, and I had to row against the wind. I don't think I managed to advance more than a meter. Desperate, I looked around once more and saw that Herrera had disappeared. Only Rengifo was swimming confidently to. I was sure he would make it. I had heard him snoring below my bunk, and I was convinced that his serenity was stronger than the sea. In contrast, Carabello was struggling with Castillo so that Castillo wouldn't let go of his neck. They were less than 3 meters away. I figured that if they got just a little closer, I could hold out enough for them to grab. But at that moment, a gigantic wave lifted the raft, and from the top of the huge crest, I could see the mast of the small ship heading away from me. When I came down again, Carabello had vanished with Castillo hanging onto his neck. Alone, 2 meters away, Rengifo was still swimming calmly towards the raft. I don't know why I did this absurd thing. Knowing I couldn't move forward, I put the oar in the water, as though trying to prevent the raft from moving, trying to anchor it in place. Rengifo, exhausted, paused a moment, then raised his arm as he had when he held his headphones aloft and shouted again, "Fatso, row over here!" The wind was blowing from his direction. I yelled that I couldn't row against the wind, that he should make another try, but I felt he hadn't heard me. The crates of cargo had disappeared, and the life raft danced from side to side, battered by the waves. In an instant, I was 5 meters away from Rengifo and had lost sight of him. But he appeared in another spot, still not panicking, ducking underwater to prevent the waves from sweeping him away. I stood up, holding out the oar, hoping Rengifo could get close enough to reach it. But then I could see he was tiring, losing heart. He called to me again, sinking, "Fatso, Fatso." I tried to row, but it was as hopeless as the first time. I made a last try so that Rengifo could raise the oar, but the raised hand, which a few minutes earlier had been trying to keep the headphones from sinking, sank forever, less than 2 meters from the oar. I don't know how long I stayed like that, balancing in the life raft, holding out the oar. I kept searching the water, hoping that someone would surface soon, but the sea was clear, and the wind, getting stronger, blew against my shirt like the howl of a dog. The cargo had disappeared. The mast, growing more distinct, proved that the small ship hadn't sunk, as I had first thought. I felt calm. I thought that one of my mates had managed to reach the other life raft. There was no reason they shouldn't have reached it. The rafts weren't provisioned. In fact, none of the life rafts of the small ship was outfitted. But there were 6 of them, apart from the rowboats and the whalers. It was reasonable to believe that some of my mates had reached the other life rafts as I had reached mine, and perhaps the destroyer was searching for us. Very soon I was aware of the sun, a midday sun, hot and metallic. Stupefied, not fully recovered, I looked at my watch. It was noon on the dot. The last time Rengifo had asked me time on the small ship, it was 11:30. I had checked the time again, and the disaster had not yet occurred. When I looked at my watch on the life raft, it was exactly noon. It had taken only 10 minutes for everything to happen. For me to reach the life raft and try to rescue my shipmates and stand motionless in the raft, searching the empty sea, listening to the sharp howl of the wind. I thought it would take them at least 2 or 3 hours to rescue me. 2 or 3 hours, I calculated. It seemed an extraordinarily long time to be alone at sea, but I tried to resign myself to it. I had no food or water, and by 3 in the afternoon I would surely have a searing thirst. The sun burnt my head and my skin, which was dry and hardened by salt. Since I had lost my cap, I splashed water on my head, and I just sat on the side of the raft, waiting to be rescued. It was only then that I felt the pain in my right knee. The thick, blue drill fabric of my trouser leg was wet, so I had a hard time rolling it up. But when I did, I was startled. I saw a deep, half moon shaped wound on the lower part of my knee. I didn't know if I had gashed it on the side of the ship or if it had happened when I hit the water, for I didn't notice it until I was seated in the life raft. Though the wound burned a little, it had stopped bleeding and was completely dry because of the salt water, I imagine. Uncertain as to what to do, I decided to make an inventory of my belongings. I wanted to figure out what I could count on in my solitude at sea. First of all, I could rely on my watch, which kept perfect time and which I couldn't stop glancing at every 2 or 3 minutes. In addition, I had my gold ring, which I had bought in Cartagena the year before, and a chain with a medal of the Virgin of Carmen on it, also purchased in Cartagena from another sailor for 35 pesos. In my pockets, I had nothing but the keys to my locker on the small ship and the 3 business cards I had been given at a store in Mobile one day in January when I had gone out shopping. Since I had nothing to do, I read the cards over and over to distract myself until I was rescued.